Welcome to Maya Dynamics Level 1, Week 6. We already have a question on the the live session, which I'm trying to make sure that I'm understanding correctly. If I can offset the dynamics animation. So, while Julius types a bit more about it, I tell you that this week we're going to talk about particle goals. Particle goals are the ability. Rafe, can you mute your microphones, you guys, all of you, please, if you don't mind? Because I'm getting kind of a bit of feedback on the microphone. So just hit the microphone icon, please, and mute them. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. So can you guys please mute your microphones? Because I'm getting a bit of noise coming from some of you. Thank you, Julius. Thank you, Rafe. Shabana, can you please mute your mic? To mute your microphone, you need to click on the microphone icon at the top. Okay, I don't know what Shabana, maybe she's not there, so I'm going to see if I can mute it from here. No, I can't. So Shabana, please, when you have a minute, please mute your microphone. All right, perfect. So I was saying that I'm going to talk about particle goals, and particle goals are the ability particles have to morph or follow the topology of geometry. They can follow the transformation, they can follow the deformation, and they can also follow points in space, meaning locators, or they can also be goal to other particle systems. Okay, so we're going to be using, this is a very popular technique, okay, very common, very powerful way to deal with particles, and we're going to see a few applications today and a few more next week. Okay, now I understand what Julie's asking me. You want to start calculating your particles before you run the simulation. Still a bit confusing. Probably you want to say if you can calculate your particles before your animation begins, not the simulation but the animation. Am I right? So let's say your animation begins on frame 10. Can you start calculating particles in frame negative? Yeah, no problem. I'll show you in a second, of course. That is very common, and yeah, actually it's part of the examples for today, so it's coming. Beautiful. So remember, guys, questions are more than welcome, and place them on the chat window, and I'll keep coming back and forth to look for you. So let's go ahead and roll. Let's do the normal, give us some room to play, and I'm going to make a sphere and an emitter. Very fancy. So let's go ahead and start with this. Scale this up, and I'm going to make any particle emitter. So go to dynamics, particles, make an emitter, and we're going to offset this guy just for the hell of it. Somewhere over there. No grid. Perfect. So with the technique we're going to learn today, okay, the first step is to find a way to get particles that come from, let me just rewind again and play. They come from this emitter to somehow, okay, morph into the shape of the sphere. It's very simple. You will select, to first set it up is nothing. Just select the particle, shift select the sphere under the particles menu. You're going to have now something. You see, we're working our way down a little bit. We worked on the instancer last week. Now we're going to work on goals. So if you go to the options for that, extremely simple. You only have an attribute called goal weight. And the goal weight is a number that goes from 0 to 1, and it will determine the percentage of attraction that the particles have to the goal geometry. Simple as that. If we leave it at 1, it's going to be 100%. I'm going to start simple. I'm going to start with nothing. Okay, hit create. My outliner, you will see that there's nothing new. There's nothing that you haven't seen before. It's just simply my geometry, my emitter, and my particle system. The only difference is going to be now on the particles. If you go to the channel box, you're going to have, let me open this up a little. You're going to have this attribute that shows up here, which is called goal weight, and it has 0 in between brackets. Okay, and you can see you can control this after the fact. No matter if you set it to any number when you first create it, you can always come here and change it. And being on the channel box like this means it can be keyframe, or it can be driven by expressions, or it can be driven by connections to your master controls, okay, or whatever other ways you want to drive this value that goes in here. So if you rewind and play, you get nothing different, of course, because the attraction is set to 0. Let's crank this number to 0.25 and rewind and play it. And you see that these particles start to do something. Okay, let's check them out. There's no fields in the scene, there's no expression, there's nothing, but these guys are moving. Okay, and if I haven't changed my, let me just double check something in here, make sure that my playback speed, okay, perfect. So you must be seeing also, you must be getting the feel that these particles are oscillating along the sphere. You can kind of getting like a pulsating feel going back and forth. And that's exactly what is happening. These particles have a 25% attraction to the sphere. So that means that they're going to start heading towards it and they're going to overshoot, okay? And they're going to start to come back, and slowly but surely, eventually, these particles are going to start placing themselves in the vertices of the sphere, okay? I can make this effect a bit more noticeable by increasing this number. Let's try doubling it up, 0.5. Okay, you can see that the overshot is a bit less, and you can also kind of see that they start to take place on the sphere. That's 0.5. Let's try 0.75. It'll be a lot more easier to see. Perfect. Okay, you get a bit of movement. And of course, 1, well, I shouldn't say of course, but 1 means 100% attraction. You won't even see them travel. They will just automatically show up on the sphere. And actually, I'm going to change the particle type to spheres. And let's go in and make these things a little bit smaller, because I want you to see what they're doing clearly. Okay, so 0.15. Beautiful. So I'm going to rewind. I'm going to leave the goal at 1, and I'm going to go frame by frame. Frame 1, check it out. Okay, you get particles down here. Frame 2, over there. Perfect. And so on until you reach the top of the sphere. And you can also see, I hope you do, they're placed on the vertices of the sphere. Okay, so I rewind. You can see that, check out the first ones at the bottom. I can maybe reduce the size of them a little bit more. You will see that these guys are placed, okay, on the vertices, and that is the default behavior. You have to be always very aware of this part. The default behavior is for them to adopt the vertices, okay? In the order they're doing this, you can kind of see they start from the bottom and then go all the way to the top. It's because the sphere has, the topology of the sphere has an order, had vertices, and those vertices have an order, have an ID. And you also know that particles also have an ID. So the default behavior is going to be the particle 0 is going to be attached to vertex number 0, 1 to 1, 2 to 2, so on and so forth, until you reach the end of the sphere. Once you do, meaning the end of the sphere, means once you reach the last vertex of the sphere, at that point, then the cycle will begin over again. Okay, so you will start getting particles at the bottom, climbing all the way to the top. This means that if you have particles that live forever and then you don't limit the number of particles that you're emitting, you will end up with particles on top of other particles occupying the exact same position or space in your scene, which is a massive waste of resources. Okay, so keep that in mind. I'll show you now how you can deal with the situation, but basically keep that in mind. You won't even see it if you don't remember what I'm just saying. You won't notice the difference. Only you will notice the computer will get slower. So it climbs and it looks the same. Okay, but you can see my particle count. If I grab my particles, remember, go to the shape node. If you scroll to the top, I have 2,400 particles. I'm going to do it from the beginning, okay? So there you go. Nothing, 41, 83, 124, 166, okay, 208, 333, 374. And then you keep going. It doesn't look any different on the screen. But look at my particle count. It keeps climbing. We're over 1,000, 1,200. This is going to go forever until your computer can handle anymore, until you run out of frames, whatever happens first. So keep that in mind. What is the solution? Okay, let's say that you want to have, we're going to do examples that have this application, but just to kind of ease you into that one, how do you, for example, how do you know how many particles you need in order to avoid having particles on top of each other? Given that they're attached to the vertices of the sphere, you need to know how many vertices the sphere will have. And then you have a handy little display here called poly count, I believe. This little guy over here. Okay, so if you select your sphere, it tells me that I have 382 vertices. Means that I don't need any more than 382 particles in order to guarantee that I have one on each vertex and no more. And we know how to do that. We can go to the particles, we can go to particle shape, and then the max count that we have used before. We can set this guy to 382, and we're going to guarantee, no matter what my emitter is doing, that we're going to have exactly one particle per vertex. Okay, beautiful. Nothing more. The speed of my scene remains. I'm working at real time, and everything is fine. Perfect. Now, this responds to animation, like I was saying. Okay, so let's go ahead and mess with this a little bit. And I'm going to mess with this sphere. I'm going to animate it a little bit using just a few expressions, just to show you that the expressions that we have put on particles, some of them can be used on geometry. So I want to modify the translation. I'm going to make a new expression. I want you to get used to using expressions more and more. So I'm going to grab the translate. You can do like this. You can just grab, for example, the translate in one channel. Right click, create a new expression. If you're not sure how to, type it. The translate in X is going to be equal, okay, to the noise. And we haven't talked about this fully yet, but if you are aware of, if you remember the math from high school, you remember that you have the sine, okay, the sine curve, which I don't want to draw it because every time I try to draw it, it's embarrassing on the screen because I'm using a mouse and not a tablet. So let me just find where's my Safari? Oh, well, I'm confused. I don't know where my browser went. But we can do it in this one, I believe. Okay, so you can go in. No, this one doesn't have a search box. I was gonna Google. Oh, it's right here. Perfect. So sine curve. This will be a lot faster than me having to draw it for you. So here's a sine curve. Okay, so it's a curve that oscillates from -1 to 1. Okay, based on a parameter that changes, that in this case is time. Okay, so for now, okay, this is the sine curve. Begins at 0. Okay, and then you also have the cosine. Okay, which is just an offset of this curve that you can just basically will begin at 1 and go to 0. And then Maya has another one called the noise curve. Okay, the noise function, I'm sorry. The sine function, the cosine function, you have the tangent, okay, you have all of those. The noise function is just like the sine function that you have in here, but instead of being a smooth interpolation between values, it's going to be a noisy pattern. Okay, so it's going to oscillate, but it's always going to go from -1 to 1 based on time. Okay, so that being said, I can go in here, for example, and say that I want the translation in X. Okay, let's say that I want to make this sphere oscillate left and right for eternity. Regardless of how many frames I'm using, I can just say this is going to be equal to the sine, and you have to put the parameter that you want to use. Is it going to be based on time? What is it going to be changing those values? And you can start, for example, with the sine of time. This expression right here is going to make this sphere move from -1 to 1 back and forth based on time. It will be hard to see it because -1 and 1 is not enough, but you can kind of see that this sphere is starting to oscillate, correct? Let's say that you want to make it oscillate then between 10 and -10, okay, based on time. Then you can simply, given that you know the result is a number from -1 to 1, you can multiply this guy by 10, and then you can see now my sphere moved. Now we go from -10 to 10. So this number, this multiplication you're doing outside, is going to determine the amplitude of your oscillation. Let me just find it again. Translate X. Okay, this number determines the amplitude, and this value determines the frequency. Let's say that you want to oscillate faster. Stay from -10 and 10 but faster. Then you're going to multiply this thing, for example, times 2, and it's going to do it twice as fast. Okay, so let's rewind this, hit play. Perfect. So you're going to see I'm talking about goals, but I'm also kind of giving you a little bit of expressions introduction because it's important anyway. So perfect. With this, you have what you need, okay, to animate, or at least to randomly animate things. Because then you can just copy this. I'm gonna paste it twice. And let's say that the sign is not what you want. You want something a bit more erratic. No problem, you type noise and you will see the difference. Actually, let me just do it with noise first. You saw what the sign does, it's a very smooth movement. With noise, you can see that it's random. But you know that it's not gonna go past 10 and negative 10. So that's a beauty. Done. I'm going to use a similar expression. I'm going to change the sign for noise. And I'm going to do a similar thing, but instead of using the exact value, because this is going to give me the same number, which doesn't really matter too much if sorry, this is for the y-axis. But I want to offset it in time, okay? So, you saw the curve that I was showing you. Basically, the curve, you see, that begins at 0. Time 0, okay, this is going to be your time. When time is 0, the value is 0 of the translation in this case. If you offset this, okay, if you offset time, is if you were to take the entire curve and move it to the right or to the left to make it look a little bit different. And that's what I do by just adding, for example, 2. I'm moving this 2 units, so time, whatever value of time is here on frame 0, time from this expression is 0. For this expression is 0 plus 2, and then you multiply by 2 to give it the speed. Okay, it's a very simple thing. So this drives the amplitude, this drives the frequency. Well, this number with the multiplication drives the frequency, and this value over here drives the offset. Oops, sorry, drives the offset of this number. Okay, no problem. I got that in Y. And we're going to do the same for Z. So change that over here. You can see that it's very quick to do the expressions. And we can also put the noise. And let's do time, for example, plus 4. Leave it at that and then do, I don't know, to do something different, let's just do 15. X, Y, and Z, all put in one expression. Remember what I think I mentioned that at some point. When I hit edit, you can see that the 3 channels show up, and the reason I like to put them all into one, as opposed to going and right-clicking in here, edit, create expression, and then do another, is because here I can just control all of them at once. I can go edit expression, and I have all my 3 values to modify, as opposed to if I were to do them separately, then I will have to go one at a time, open them up. It's a bit more annoying. So with that, I'm going to get a sphere that does some funky dance. Move around. Okay, you can kind of see that this guy, I have no control. I have control, of course I have control over it, but it's doing something that by animating by hand, it will take me too long, and I have to, I can have as many frames as I want to. This thing is going to keep dancing for me. And the reason I'm making it dance is because I want to take my goal and I'm going to lower the value of the goal weight, okay, which right now is set to 1, is 100%. Let's do 0.2. And then I'm gonna just change some numbers, and so you will see how you will start, as soon as you start seeing the results, you start getting ideas in your head, things that you could probably use it for, okay? And that's happens, okay, when you look at this, okay? So this is just by using 0.2 and making this sphere dance. So this will give you ideas. This could be whatever, I don't know, whatever effect you're planning on doing. That is with 0.2. Let's go in and say 0.4. Okay, to get the oscillation, but I'm going to do 0.4 and emitting them from the beginning. Okay, so let's do 0.4. Check this out. But they're also, you can see that the attraction remains, okay, to the vertices, so they do tend to keep a bit of a spherical shape. Okay, I'm going to show you now how to change that a little. So those are the values. Okay, let's do 0.1. Okay, something very loose. And those guys went to limbo, so let's go in and rewind and play it back. Okay, this is a value of 0.1. Okay, so eventually you will be able to do swarms of bees and bugs, and I'm going to show you a lot of stuff you can do with this. So basically you can see no forces, and the expressions are just to move the sphere around. So perfect. Let me just do a little checkup on my guys. You guys doing all right? Wow, you guys all rose your hand. So, well, Rafe? Sorry, can you guys hear me?
I can now.
So you couldn't before? If it's something as obvious as the sound breaking, I need you guys to open your microphone and interrupt me, tell me, because we spend some time in the class, and the recording is going to be fine. I'm just worried for you guys. So, or well, one of the others, Rafe, or Shabana. Your mic doesn't work, Julius, because it's muted. You have to unmute it and then use it. But anyway, so you guys didn't hear anything of what I've been saying so far? I don't know who this is, but I can't hear anything. Well, you guys can hear me now, okay? Can you hear me okay now? Give me a thumbs up if not. Sorry, I'm gonna pause the recording because this is taking a while. 1 second. Silly. If you guys log out and log back in, I know Julius, you did it. Shabana and Rafe, if you guys want, log out, come back, and that should help you with any issues you have. So I'm gonna continue moving. The recording, like I said, is gonna be fine. The recording has the audio, is not being broadcast, it's being recorded directly to my machine. So that shouldn't be a problem there. So, all right, so we have this result, okay, where the particles are gold, in this case with a value of 0.1, okay? Basically, I'm gonna move this back. Well, you can see that they actually follow the animation of the sphere, and it will also follow deformation, okay? We'll see it in a minute. So that's basically it. Now, the one thing that you probably would want to do in some cases is to avoid getting those particles attached. Let's say that you want to, scatter them or place them in the sphere evenly and randomly around the whole surface, not just on the vertices. What I'll do for now to stop moving the sphere, I'm going to mute the animation that I did. So this guy is not going to jump around anymore. And well, you can see my particles are coming and doing their thing. And they will eventually come to rest into a vertice. I'm going to force that effect faster by just taking the gold weight and putting that back to 1. Perfect. So let's say that you want to scatter these guys around the whole sphere. This is done based on the U and V of this object, okay? The UVs of this sphere. And we're going to use that to determine a position along this geometry and tell the particles to pick randomly a position in U and a position in V and place themselves in there. So to do this, you need to go into the attribute editor for the particles. Okay, we're going to add a couple of attributes on a per particle basis. Remember, this is something that your particles are going to need to select each one of them a separate position in U and V and put themselves in there. So that means it's going to have to be a per particle object, per particle attribute, I'm sorry. So select the general tab, okay? And we're going to find under the particle list, this is alphabetical, and we're dealing with goals today. So go to the G, and you will see that you have goal offset, goal U, goal V. Goal U and goal V is what we need. Okay, this is going to allow the particles to pick positions in U and V and put themselves in there. So I'm going to grab those two, and I'm going to add them at the same time. You can see that they show up on my list, and you also have something called goal PP, okay, for per particle goal, which we'll deal with it later. And you also have something called parent U and parent V. Parent U and parent V is going to be related to goal U and goal V. Could be related to goal U and goal V. Basically, the difference is the parent U and parent V means the position when they were emitted, or the position where the emitter is. In this case, it's the surface, right? So you can use parent U and parent V to tell particles to stay where they were born. Okay, so it's an ability. So just keep in mind that when it has the word parent, it relates to the emitter. So the emitter's position in U and in V is an attribute that you could query and you could use. In this case, I'm going to use goal U and goal V. So I'm going to go to creation, and I'm going to do it on creation because I need these particles to be born in that position and stay there. I don't want them to change it every time, right? So it's very simple. You just copy and paste this, and you can just say, but you need to specify a random number, and this random number, you need to have an idea what the UVs of your object are doing, okay? So I'm going to grab my my sphere, and I'm going to go and check what the UVs look like. You can see that the UVs for the sphere are perfectly placed between 0 and 1. You can see that they go in 1 in the U direction, from 0 to 1 in the V direction, meaning that these UVs are normalized. And this is the way you should be using UVs for effects. Okay, so let's say that you're doing a complicated character that has a different UV set, of course, done for rendering. If it's a normal big studio, they will provide you with a UV set for effects that will be normalized, and it can be used for this kind of effects. Okay, if not, you have to do it yourself. And the whole idea behind this is that I know that all my UVs are perfectly placed between those two numbers, and it's very easy for me to write an expression. It's not the end of the world if it's not normalized, but it's going to be very painful for you to determine where does the range begins and ends. It could get nasty. So as long as you can normalize this in any way you like, is the best result. So I know that my UVs are from 0 to 1, so I can just go back to my particles. And I'm going to type goal U, okay, is equal to a random 1. Okay, and random number between 0 and 1 for the position in U. They're going to pick any number they like between these two and put themselves in there. And I'm going to do, because I'm lazy to type, I'm going to do the exact same thing for the V direction. Different number, okay, for each one. Each one is going to pick a different random number. Hit create. Now you rewind and play, and then you get this result. You can see that the particle emission stops after a while. It's because I'm forcing this to have only 382 particles, which I can easily remove. Let's just get rid of this, and to come back to having any number of particles, just remember to take the max count and put it to -1. That means unlimited. So these guys are going to just place themselves and eventually cover the entire sphere. Okay, and they have the same rules. I'm going to basically, just for the sake of speed, I'm going to limit this to 1,000, and I'm going to unmute the animation and show you how the result changes dramatically now. It's a completely different look. So let's just unmute this thing, and I'm going to go in and put start with a goal weight of, let's say, 0.2. Just so you can see a bit of the result that we're going to get. Because now they're not confined to locating themselves into a CV, then now they can move randomly. So it's a bit more of a swarmy kind of feel that you're getting, right? With this look. Let's go ahead and increase this value. All the particles at the moment have the same attraction. Okay, we're going to modify that in different examples later on, but you can see now with a value of 0.5 what they can do. And these guys will respond to forces as well. Okay, so you could eventually connect a turbulence field and break up this result a little more. So before I move to the next one, okay, I don't see Rafael, so I guess he bailed, but you guys can hear me okay now, Julius and Shovana? Perfect. Okay, I'll continue then. Cool. So that is, in a nutshell, what goals can do. Now let me show you a few applications, okay, a few examples that I have here. So, because it's not just done, not used for making swarms of bees or whatever, right? It has a lot more application than you'll think. First one is going to be this, for example. So I have this scene that I made, which is basically a sword that I have been animated with expressions, the same way I animated the sphere, and it's intersecting these cylinders, which In your mind, they will resemble whatever you want, soldiers or whatever it is, a piece of meat, I don't know, something, okay? It's to simulate some, you could have a battle, okay? You could have this kind of event, and you can use this technique to determine, to do collision detection, okay? And determine which areas of the sword have collided with the cylinder, and then use that for information for something, either for emitting blood or for whatever, for wounds, or I don't know, okay? Just basically to determine where and when the collision has happened. We can do that very quickly. I'm going to select my sword, and I'm going to emit particles of it. So let's go back to dynamics. Particles emit from object. Surface, we're going to call this sword emitter. Hit create. Automatically, I'm going to grab my particles. I don't have to, but I don't need to see them anymore. So I have to select my particles, and I'm going to select my sword, and I'm going to gold them right away. So particles, gold. And the idea behind this is that I want to use these particles. I'm going to place them on the sword, and I'm going to have them follow the sword. And I'm going to use those particles to determine the collision of the object and of the two objects in this case. So if I want them to follow the sword 100, with 100% attraction, I'm going to put my gold weight to 1 right away, hit create, and that will give me, but I'm going to make them spheres because that's the best way for you guys to see this. If I make them spheres, and I think I had to use quite a big of a radius last time, so you can kind of see them. I'm going to make them a little bigger. Okay, so you can see them there, and you can see what I was saying earlier, that the default behavior is for these particles to attach themselves to the vertices. And in this case, I don't really want that. I want to place them everywhere in my sword. Okay, so for that, I will have to first, remember, I have to check the UVs for my sword and make sure that they're okay. So I'm going to go quickly to polygons, edit UVs, UV texture editor, and I can see right here what I was telling you before. These UVs are not normalized. They're okay, but they're not normalized. They're everywhere here. So that's really a pain in the ass, because you see what I mean. I don't know what number this is, and I don't know what number that is. So it's a bit of a pain. So the UVs for effects are a completely different set that you don't really have to use for rendering. So that you can do anything you want, and the easiest thing will be to say normalize, and you can see that automatically it places the UVs where they're supposed to be. Now they're from 0 to 1. They're all messy. I don't care because it's not for rendering. If you want to learn more about UVs with more time, watch Igor's course, Introduction to Maya, and he spends more time on this. Now I have a set of UVs that works. Then we're going to repeat the steps that we did for the sphere, which I'm going to go down here. General, particle tab. We're going to add gold U and gold V. And we're going to go in and put an expression, because I know that these guys are normalized. Okay, I can just quickly say gold U equal a random between 0 and 1. Remember that if you don't specify the 0 on the random expressions, it's automatically put for you. Same thing with the beginning of the whole expression. You can see how very quickly you can just put an expression on those two guys, typing very little. Okay, so that expression has been placed. Now we rewind and play, and we get particles everywhere. Perfect. They do tend to move. Okay, they do move like that. It's because the UVs in this case, I'm not really UVing correctly this object. Okay, from the beginning, you will have to UV this object in the static position. Make sure that those UVs are not swimming. But that is a class for another level, not for this dynamic section. This will work for me perfectly fine. So I got particles that follow my sphere. Okay, and I'm going to use these particles then to determine if there's been a collision or not. So we did it with the rain. Okay, we did collision events on the rain already. So I'm going to do the same. I'm going to grab, instead of using each one of the cylinders individually, if you just want to detect collisions, in general for everything, the best way that you want, remember we did it for the car, minimizing the surfaces to collide with. The best way to deal with this will be to combine all this. So if you go to mesh combine, then you're dealing with just one object for collision. And I'm going to grab my particles and I'm going to make them collide with this object. We're talking about week 2 or something, okay? So you can see how the things that you learned earlier start to connect with everything we're doing now. I'm going to make them collide. And I'm going to use this information to emit another particle system. But first I'm going to show you what happens. So these particles are gold 100% to this sort. We're now making them collide, and now you're going to get a conflict. You can see what's happening. These particles, even though they're supposed to stay with the sort, they do this. Okay, they get attached, they get all funky. It's because they have a bit of a conflict of interest in here. These particles are colliding, but they also have to be attracted. So the way to fix this situation is to go down here to the geoconnector, okay, the one that determines the resilience and the friction of this. And you're going to take the resilience, which is the bounciness of these particles, which is set to 1, which is, you know, obviously very high. You could take it to 0, but that's not going to save you either. There's no bouncing. They're supposed to do nothing. There's no friction and no bounciness, but they're still going to get funky. That's fine. The way to fix this is to use a resilience of actually -1. -1, what it does is basically it lets you detect the collision, but nothing happens, truly nothing happens to the particle. So you can see now the weird behavior went away, but I'm still able to now go to Particles, Collision Event Editor, and we're going to make a collision event that happens in all collisions, where we're going to emit any number of particles that you like with no velocity. Well, first I'm going to leave it with velocity so you see what happens. Basically, all I'm doing here is activating this emit. You could do whatever you want if you wanted to emit more particles or not, doesn't matter. I'm going to hit create, and you can see that a new particle system is right here. So let's name this one gold because it's the one for the sword, and let's name this one, for the hell of it, blood. It's not blood, it's not going to be blood, but at least, you know, something to differentiate it. And let's go ahead and rewind and play this. So now when the particles of the sword collide with this geometry, they will emit a particle in that position. So you get a mess at the beginning, but something is happening, but these particles are jumping everywhere. And they're jumping everywhere simply because you're passing the velocity of the particle that is colliding, okay, the sword particles. You know, there is a value on this blood particles called inherit factor, which is right here, okay, inherit factor. That is the ability of these particles to pick up or inherit the velocity from the parent, which in this case is the sword particles. So those particles are moving because the sword is moving. So there is velocity in there. But if you pass that on, you really wouldn't want to do that. You will want these particles to be born right with, you know, when the collision happened, and don't move. Or at least don't move because of this, the sword is moving them. You want to just leave them there. So basically you want to tell these particles to inherit nothing. Just be born, no velocity. It's almost like if you were to do a speed attribute on the regular emitter. If you put it to 0, this particle is born and stays. Same thing here. Now you will see what you want to see, which is basically this. Okay, you can see that is very cool way, very quickly. Okay, I could make these particles. You will make them look like blood or like whatever you want. In this case, I'm just talking about. Detection of collisions, okay? So I make them red just so you can really see them. But you can clearly see that whenever this geometry intersects the cylinders, a new set of particles gets created, and those particles can be used for whatever you want, okay? They can be used for, you could emit another particle system that drips down and it looks like blood, okay? Then it collides with the cylinder and you move down, whatever you want. But in this case, this is the perfect way to very cheaply do detection of collision of geometry with geometry. Quick check over here. You guys are fine and no questions? Don't leave them all until the end because it might be best, you know, if we have the scene open. So if something's not perfectly clear, this is your time. Shobana, everything clear? I know that Julius is writing something. How would you link particle? Again, can you elaborate a bit more? Link them with what? Link them with collisions. Let's Let's see what Julius is typing. Like the blog example. Well, you know, if you wanted, in this case, it's simply grabbing the blood particles. I would do it this way. If I wanted to do, let's say, blood dripping down this, I wouldn't use the collision particles that are here as the blood. You could. And it's simply, if you wanted to do that, okay, you could go into fields, for example, gravity. Okay, so you have a gravity field that is affecting just the blood. And then I will grab, for example, the blood and the geometry, go to particles, make collide. You could do that, okay? It's up to you. I wouldn't like that. I will use a different particle system. But right now, even like this will move. So you will see now how the blood particles, they get emitted and they will slowly start to move. And the reason it's hard to see them move is because this scene is quite large. So I'm going to increase the value of gravity so you can really see what I mean. So I'm going to make a very strong gravity field. And you can see how they start to at least move down the cylinder. It's not necessary. If they're going to just move down, it wouldn't be completely necessary to make them collide. You try to avoid collisions as much as possible, you know. But you can see now that these particles are dripping down. Okay, I'm moving down. So grab this. That's the blood particles. You can see that they move. They're still emitted on the collision, and then the gravity field takes over, and these guys move. You can render them as blobbies, the same way you're rendering the bubbles. Okay, this will work fine, the same way. Okay, is that okay? Yes, that's exactly what's happening. The collision of the particles from the sword is triggering the emission of the particles of the blood. That's how you detect a collision. And then you can use those particles directly as your blood, for example, or you can emit another set of particles of those particles to get something, you know, to get a separation. So you get an emitter that is painted pretty much by the collision, and then you can emit another set of particles out of that. I'm going to do another example that might just clear any additional questions you have about this, but it's basically that you're using particles of the sword to determine where the collision happened and do something about it. You can emit, or you can use them directly, whatever it is that you want. It's not that complex. You know, you have the recording to watch it a few more times if it's something you're missing here, but it sounds complex, but it's not really that complex. It's just simply these particles here, okay, the pink ones, are go to the sword. They collide the same way you will make rain, okay? You collide with this geometry. And it's exactly the rain example. It's just exactly the same technique. With the rain example, you make the drop of rain hit, and on that collision, you make another set of particles show up. It's exactly the same. It just doesn't move like rain. It just does this. It's basically, that's why I like to show you guys that you can combine techniques that might seem very simple to you at the beginning into something that you see, Julius, it sounds very complex to you, but it's not. It's basically a reuse of the knowledge that we have already, and we're using goals to place them around. You will hear the term scattering in other applications, okay? Scattering points, okay? That's basically what we're doing here. So nothing biggie there. I'm gonna open the next example, okay? Just before, because I don't have too much time, but I wanna show you the next example. And we're gonna do foot impacts, okay? So let's just open this scene, and we're going to use the same technique. So I have this character which I place on the FTP server for you guys. So those of you, Giovanna, Rafael, and Julius, you can go in and download it from the FTP. And those of you watching the recording that have contributed to the content supporter package, you already have access to the FTP, so that file is there for you. Those of you who don't, then you can find your own geometry and replicate something like this. Or you can still contribute, and then you will get your FTP details right away. There's lots of information on the server already for all the courses. Basically, what I have here is a little model that I made long time ago, but I did put a clip of motion capture, and you can use this for anything you like. What I'm going to do is create, using this technique, I'm going to create dust coming off the impact from the feet with the ground. Okay, so I'm going to grab those two things that don't need to be there. I'm going to delete that. And I have this animation, okay? So perfect. So let's say that this is given to you and you want to always try to work in your effects, okay? And I can stress this enough, I say it in every class. Work in these effects in a flexible, adaptable way. You don't want to make this in using keyframes and placing emitters everywhere on the floor. That's not the right way to do it, because if they change the animation of the character, which believe me they will, you will have to redo everything you're working on. What you want to do is set up this in a way that they can do anything they like with the animation. They can change the animation 5 minutes before the delivery. You don't care. Your effect is set up and it will work no matter what. And it will work in a way that pretty much this kind of technique is nowadays done. You do it on the master asset, okay, the master animation, and the animators themselves run the shot. They do their animation, and they're able to export the particles themselves, and it goes directly to the lighting department. You can pretty much skip completely the effect. You wouldn't have to worry about doing this shot by hand over and over again. The way to do that, okay, is, or at least the one way, or the way I'm going to show you how to do this, is to do this. Okay, so I'm going to show, this is the skin of the character. I'm going to duplicate it just to make sure that I have a copy that I can use in effects, and I have the master one in case something goes wrong. So I'm going to duplicate special, and I'm going to make one copy, keeping the input connections, meaning that I can see now I have two sets of skin that have the same movement. Okay, so I'm going to take alien skin, which is the original one. I'm going to hide it, and I'm going to stay with this guy, which I can say, for example, this is the alien skin for effects. I don't need to see the joints. I just care for the geometry in this case. And you can see that I have my guy doing his thing, no problem. Next thing you will do is analyze the animation, okay, or determine in this case, okay, in this specific case, which areas of this body are colliding with the ground. And I can see that it's only the feet, not only the feet, but just the foot, you know, the bottom part of the foot. So what I will do is then get rid of all the areas that I don't care for. Okay, that's just common sense. I'm just gonna get rid of any faces that I don't really need to see. So I'm just gonna go in and grab everything all the way down to the bottom of the foot, and I'm going to say bye, and I'm gonna end up with this, the eyes, I don't need to see. And what do I have left here? Well, I have my alien skin is just this section here of the foot, and because there's history, I still get my little feet doing their thing. Something goes wrong, you make a mistake, you want to start over, no worries, you can always come back in here. Or you want to render, no problem, you will render this skin and you wouldn't render the bottom of the foot. But you can see that they're both moving. Perfect. Now with this, I can just replicate very quickly the technique that we just did for the sword, and it works exactly the same way. So I'm going to go in and emit particles of the feet right here. So particles, emit from object. Okay, let's name this guy feet emitter. It's a surface emitter. Hit create. I'm going to grab my particles right away. I'm going to rename them. Let's just name them feet gold, for example. And I'm going to gold them to the geometry that they're being emitted from. So I'm going to gold them, and I'm going to gold them with 100%. Remember, I want them to follow the topology. Hit create. Done. We know, okay, let me just do my usual here when I make them spheres, and I make them small spheres. And if we rewind and hit play, then we get this. But this now are particles. Okay, they're moving along. I just made them very big, okay, the sphere. They shouldn't be so big, they should be smaller, so you can see. Perfect. So you can see that the spheres have the default behavior, okay, they're attached to the vertices, and we need to decide if that's enough or not. Okay, doesn't mean that you always have to scatter them evenly across the geometry. It doesn't have to be like that every time. I can tell you that if you do scatter them everywhere in the geometry, it's slower to calculate than doing this, the default behavior. So make your decision. I'm not going to scatter them, because you will see that unless I'm having something so close to the camera, okay, that is probably so close that you will have to use a different technique maybe, then you wouldn't really need to scatter too much. Especially if it's a high resolution mesh. Okay, if the polygons of this object or the character are very high, then you wouldn't really have to scatter them, because you will get particles very close to each other. So for something like this, okay, I got my particles following. You can see that they're following the surface. But you remember from the first example that this emission continues to grow and grow. I have 2,800 particles now. I don't know if I have enough vertices to, so I probably have particles on top of each other. Remember the way to do it. You select your feet with the poly count activated. I know that I have 542 vertices, so I don't really need any more than 542 particles to guarantee one particle per vertice. That way I keep my scene very light. You can see that, oh my god, my particles following this, the motion of the animation. This animation can do whatever they want with it, as long as they don't include another body part colliding, okay? That way you will have to retouch it. But in this case, if it's just the feet, this guy can kick and move and they can move him around. It's not going to be a problem for you. This is always going to work. Grab your particles, grab your ground, particles may collide. Remember that we said that, you know, you get a funky fresh result if you leave it, okay, where particles start to detach from the feet. Let's see if you see it here. You can kind of see it. Okay, so here's my foot, and here the particles are having problems because of the resilience. You can clearly see the problem there. Perfect, even better here. And you know that to fix that, now you can just select your particles, go to your channel box, and you're going to make at the very bottom under the geo connector, you're going to make the resilience a value of -1, just to register that collision. That's it. You can see what this looks like, which is completely messed up. If you rewind now and play, there is perfect. No problems going there. Beautiful. So we have the collision. We have the ability to detect it. Now let's go in and emit. So grab the particles, collision event editor. Okay, we're going to make a new collision event based on all the collisions. Every time a particles collide, this is going to trigger. And I'm going to emit a new particle system. In this case, I'm just going to select a random particle number of 2. And remember, I don't want to give them any velocity in this case. I'm going to start with nothing. So these particles are going to be born and they're going to stay. And then I'm going to move those particles later. Okay? Hit create. A new particle system gets created, which I can rename now, for example, dust. I'm going to change the particle type from points to, let's say, clouds. Okay? And we're going to hit rewind and going to hit play, and you'll see that you have something going on. Wherever he puts the foot, whatever the foot really touches the geometry, and this is something to clear here, okay? Of course, if the animation department is not animating this thing correctly, and it happens a lot, okay? I must point that out. Sometimes the animators are, you know, if they're not aware that this shot is going to need interaction, they need to, you know, they animate these things perfectly, sometimes even a little bit above the ground. So in your case, you either move the ground up if you have the freedom to do so, or you're going to need to ask the animators to make sure that the feet have a little bit of intersection with the ground in order for this thing to work. But you can see now that very clearly whatever this guy, and I'm going to bring him in, the original one, so you can really now see the final result. You can see that whatever he steps, something happens on the floor. Perfect. Now, to answer your first question, Julius, I'm going to make these particles inherit a little bit of velocity, right? You probably want to get these particles to be kicked a little bit. So I'm going to inherit 0.1 of the velocity of the foot. So when the foot is kicking, you will see the result now. These particles will trigger. And that will make this problem at the beginning. And then everything seems to be working okay. So why is this happening at the beginning? It's because my particles are being created on the feet and they're already colliding, so it causes a little bit of a problem. What I want to do is I want to be able to start the simulation of the feet particles before the main animation of the character begins. So what I want to do, for example, is say, well, I want to start this animation on frame -25. I want to give myself a second to start. Just by changing this, it's not going to happen, right? You're going to keep playing. Nothing happens on the first 25 frames. No animation, no simulation, nothing. And it's simple. What you need to do is select the particle system that you want to begin earlier. In this case, it's the feet. And I'm going to go in here, and you have a value called start frame. Start frame is set to 1 by default. Okay? If you set this thing to -25, now the particles are going to begin their calculation at that time only this particle. You can see the dust particle remains at frame 1. So I'm going to start calculating these guys first, and 25 frames later I start calculating the dust. This gives me enough time to place all the particles that I need on the feet and then run my dust simulation. So let's go ahead and try it. You can see now the problem is going to be gone. Then you get your dust and everything is working fine. You can see he kicks it up. You will put forces, you will do drag fields and gravity fields, and you will play with the radius. You will make these particles look like dust and die when they're supposed to die. I don't have that's not the class of today. But you can see now that based on that collision, this event can happen. That being said, I think it's perfect, my timing. Questions. So Shabana and Julius, what questions do you have, if any? Do I ever use air fields? Yes, sure. Sometimes. I don't use them too often. I prefer to use uniform fields. But yeah, of course, air fields are completely valid. Yeah, you wouldn't really use air field. You have to use, well, if they seem weak, you can always increase the magnitude, of course. But you need to use, probably for the rain, you will use a gravity field and the turbulence fields, like I was showing on the actual lesson. They're stronger, better result that way. But air field works. It's just it's a matter of preference. I will only use it if I need to describe a conical shape. There's a couple of attributes on the airfield that they're only for the airfield that could be useful. But I honestly don't use it that often. Shabana, no questions, but you like the class. Well, that's good. So assignment for this week, okay? And let's keep typing your questions, Julius. Keep going. I'm just gonna open the Play Blast. Okay. We're gonna be using these techniques, okay? And I want you to apply this technique. I haven't seen one Play Blast with this set, which is disturbing for me. I know you guys are, you're in week 6 already, so you have this geometry. This is the actual assignment. So I want you to start applying everything I've told you for these weeks into this set, okay? I know you've been testing on individual scene files, but it's time to start seeing planes. I need to start seeing bubbles in the water. We need to start seeing rain in this environment. So it's time to get, busy with this. What I want you to try this technique. Of course, you can replicate the footprint, the foot impacts that we just did. You could play with a similar scene for the sword. That's fine with me. But what I want you to try pertaining this assignment is, if you can notice on the top of the tower, okay, there's a little light. And that light resembles the position of a machine gun that is going to be shooting at the camera. So I want you to put an emitter over there, and I want you to find a way to go particles from the machine gun towards us being the camera here, and to get particles to start traveling from that point towards us, not with a sharpshooter, sniper kind of ability, which is perfectly gold to the camera and was going to hit us all the time. I want to see this guy miss, and by missing I mean you're going to have to play with the goal weight, okay, of the particles coming from the machine gun to be able to, you see the camera is moving. So I want this machine gun to miss. Okay, I want it to miss. I want it to be near, but not so close to us that it's going to kill us every time. And I want it to hit other things. And you can start thinking of these terms of the bullets from the machine gun is going to start eventually hitting, okay, the crosses. I'm going to start hitting the sand, and things are going to happen. So you can apply the technique from today very easily to adjust it to something like this. Okay, so let's start seeing some of those results. Can you use geometry attached to a curve so the gold particles follow their path? Yes, no problem. They will follow any geometry, so you can animate the geometry in any way you like. And as you can see on this example with the footprints, the impacts, they follow the formation as well. Okay, so that's not a problem. Any way you like. So so I was saying, apply the stuff that we've seen so far into the actual assignment, okay? It's very important. I mean, I'm just stressing this out. If you really want to complete the course correctly, okay, this has been designed in this way. So I need to start seeing this right away. So, start getting onto it. There are a lot of challenges in here that this thing was created this way to show them. Perfect. With that, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to stop the recording. So for those of you watching this, thank you, and I will see you next week.